Hello, welcome to my buttercream drip cake tutorial video. This is definitely not the only way that you can do cakes like these, but this is the way that I found works best for me and the way I do it. So hopefully there'll be some things in here that are useful for you too. See, I begin with my piping bag with my buttercream in, and then I begin by squeezing a small amount onto my cake board. This is just to help the sponge stick down so it doesn't move around when it's set. And here obviously is a sponge that I made earlier. You don't have to use a piping bag for this next bit. You could just use a spatula or a palette knife or just any flat knife. But I find this the easiest way to help get even layers as it distributes your buttercream evenly. So once I've squeezed out in a spiral shape, I'll then grab my palette knife, I think this is called a palette knife, which is slightly angled, and I'll just very gently spread it all out so that there's a good even coverage on the top of the sponge. It's important to have a good even layer of buttercream between each sandwich of cake. If not, you'll run into problems later on and it does become very difficult to correct a wonky cake. This just means that your cake is going to be more stable and supported all the way through, and it makes life a lot easier when you come to do the next stages. So there, another sponge which I made earlier, you see they just plonk nicely on top, and then I repeat the first step again with the buttercream in the piping bag and just slowly spiral outwards, squeezing evenly to get an even layer. And then just like before, I'll use my palette knife and spread it gently around so it's all flat. My cakes as a standard are triple layered, so there is the last layer of sponge just going on top. So now the base of our cake is ready for us to start doing things to the outside of the cake. You should have a good even structure with your even layers in between, making life a lot easier when you come to these later stages. So next I'm going to be using my palette knife with the buttercream, and I'm going to be spreading it all up the sides of the cake. This is called the crumb coat. And the idea of this is that when you come to do your final outside layer on your cake, you won't get all the crumbs showing through as they'll be encased in this initial layer. This layer also provides a lot of good structural support for your cake. It sort of holds everything in. When you're applying this outside layer, you need to be gentle so as not to offset the layers too much. However, your cake will move a little as it's not yet set, so don't worry if things do start to move around. At this stage, you can manipulate your cake and move things just how you want them. Once we've fully coated the sides, we can then add some buttercream onto the top of the cake. And you're just going to spread this out while spinning on your turntable in a circular spreading motion. Again, you need to be relatively gentle just so you don't squish down one side of your cake more than the other. If you find that you have done this and your cake's looking a little bit lopsided, don't panic, you can definitely fix it at this stage. Until it goes in the fridge, nothing is set and your cake is malleable. Keep spreading and smoothing it round so you've got a good even layer on the top. Next, we're going to use a scraper to scrape away all the excess around the side, leaving us a good thin crumb coat layer. Keep scraping until you're satisfied that there's a good thin coverage all the way around the edge of the cake. And then we're going to use a smaller palette knife on an angle just to gently scrape away the crust around the edge of the top of the cake. This is so that you get that good sharp edge when your cake is finished. Once you're satisfied with the outside of your cake, you can then place it in the fridge to set. I would recommend putting your cake in the fridge for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Now we're going to do the outside of the cake, which is going to form your final layer. Now you can spread this with a palette knife just as we were doing earlier with the crumb coat. However, I personally find it easier to use a piping bag to ensure a more even coverage and distribution of buttercream around the edge of the cake. And then squeezing the piping bag with an even pressure, we're just going to spin the cake turntable, applying the buttercream all around the outside edge of the cake. This will look very messy and a bit like a mummified cake, but don't worry, it's definitely supposed to look like that at this stage, and it's very easily fixed, as you'll see in the next stage. Keep going until your cake is all covered from top to bottom around the edge. If there's a few odd gaps, don't worry, we can fill in those in the next step. Next, I like to do my first initial scrape, so we're just going to do one simple clean scrape around the edge of the cake. I like to use the excess buttercream from the scraper to form most of my top layer. This is completely up to you, but it's just something I find a little bit easier. Just as before when we were doing the crumb coat layer, we're just going to spread this out all over the top of the cake, so we've got a nice even layer. You may need to add some more buttercream, just as I'm doing here in a strange pattern, and you'll just spread this out as you were before. Obviously you'll see in this style of cake the whole top of the cake was going to be covered, so don't worry about getting this layer completely perfect, as you won't see it when it's finished. Now you can continue scraping the sides of your cake to get a smooth layer. Just sped this bit up because it gets a little bit tedious and boring watching me scrape the side of a cake several times. As you'll notice on pretty much all of my cakes, they have a ridged edge. I use a ridged scraper to finish off my cakes as I just think they're a little bit more interesting than a smooth side. However, if you did want to have a cake with a smooth edge, just spend a little bit longer getting it perfect, playing around with the different angles, holding the scraper in different pressures. Sometimes you'll need to go around twice or 3 times just to make sure you've got good sharp lines around the edge of your cake. Then place the cake in the fridge again for around 30 to 40 minutes this time. If you've got some buttercream smeared around the bottom of your cake board, don't worry at this stage. It's easy to remove with either kitchen towel or blue roll. Next, we're on to my favourite part of assembling the big cakes, which is the drip. For my plain chocolate drips, just like this one, I just use a melted baking chocolate. I prefer to use a teaspoon for my drips over a piping bag as I just find it a lot easier and I have more control. However, it's completely up to you, just find the way that works best. With my melted chocolate on my teaspoon, I'm just going to very gently tip the chocolate over the edge of my cake. You'll notice that I do join up all my drips. I don't like to leave gaps, I just think it looks much better when they're all joined up like this. Because your cake is set and cold from the fridge, you'll notice that the drips do stop around halfway down. So they should set just like this. You'll notice now that I have cleaned my board, ready for the next stage, which is the fun part where you get to see the cake really all come together. I want to fill the space on top but without it looking too repetitive. So I'm going to use one of my favourite nozzles and simply pipe some designs on top. I forgot to show you what nozzle it was at the start, but here I am showing you, and it's just a Wilton 2D. This is such a versatile nozzle, it's brilliant for cupcakes, for piping roses, and it's brilliant for these cakes too. I like the versatility that you can get on top of the cake, I just think it adds a little bit more visual interest. I used to go all the way around the edge of my cakes, around the bottom. Recently I've stopped doing that. Again, just a weird phase I go through. I think it looks better like this, a bit more random and assorted. Oh, some chocolate dip strawberries just being popped on there. Obviously some that I must have prepared earlier. I do absolutely love using chocolate dip strawberries at the moment. I think they look beautiful, and who doesn't love a chocolate strawberry? I do also love a golden biscuit, as I'm sure you all know. You only have to look at my page, they're on pretty much every cake that I make. At this stage you've done the hard bit and you can just let your imagination go wild with designing it. This is definitely the fun part, and it's really satisfying to see all your work come together at the end. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope some of it was useful to you, and I look forward to doing more tutorials. So if you've enjoyed this one, please subscribe and there will be lots more coming.